The piercing screams of 10-month-old Clara Thompson cut through the cabin of the luxury private jet, like a knife through silk, at 35,000 feet above the Missouri countryside. Billionaire Henry Thompson clutched his daughter desperately, his $1,000 suit wrinkled and his usually perfect hair disheveled. From hours of frustrated attempts to calm her, "Shh, Clara, please," Henry whispered, bouncing her gently as he paced the narrow aisle of his Gulfstream G650. The mahogany trim and cream leather seats that normally symbolized his success now felt like the walls of a prison. His daughter's cries had been relentless for the past 2 hours, ever since they'd taken off from Chicago O'Hare. But what happened next shocked everyone on that plane. The other passengers, mostly Henry's business associates, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Margaret Chen, his chief financial officer, looked up from her laptop with barely concealed irritation. "Henry, maybe we should ask the flight attendant for something? Medication?" "She's not sick," Henry snapped, immediately regretting his tone. The stress was getting to him. Ever since Sarah's death 8 months ago, every moment with Clara felt like walking through a minefield. He was a man who commanded boardrooms, who'd built a tech empire from nothing. But his own daughter remained an unsolvable puzzle. Clara's face was red and blotchy, her tiny fists waving frantically as she wailed. Henry had tried everything: her favorite stuffed elephant, a bottle, even playing classical music through the plane's sound system. Nothing worked. From the back of the cabin, in what could generously be called the economy section of the private jet, 12-year-old Jamal Wright watched the scene unfold with quiet concern. He was the only passenger who wasn't part of Henry's inner circle, having earned his seat through a scholarship program Henry's company sponsored. For underprivileged Chicago youth returning from educational trips, Jamal had been visiting his grandmother on the South Side, where she'd taught him the old songs that had been passed down through generations. As he watched the desperate father struggle with his crying baby, something stirred in his chest, a familiar melody his grandmother had hummed just days before. Little did anyone know that this moment would change everything. Henry's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted Clara's position for the 100th time. The weight of public expectations pressed down on him like a vice. Tomorrow's Wall Street Journal would have his photo on the front page, announcing his company's latest acquisition. He couldn't afford to look weak, couldn't afford to admit that he was failing at the most basic human task: comforting his own child. "Sir," the flight attendant, Jessica, approached cautiously. "We're still 2 hours from landing. Is there anything I can do?" Henry's jaw tightened. He'd built Tom Sontech from a garage startup into a $40 billion empire. But right now he felt utterly powerless. "I don't know what else to try," he admitted quietly, his voice barely audible over Clara's continued crying. Clara's sobs seemed to intensify, as if sensing her father's defeat. The sound reverberated through the cabin, making everyone acutely aware that they were trapped in this aerial nightmare together. Margaret exchanged glances with David Park, Henry's head of operations, both silently questioning their boss's ability to handle the situation. But the real shock was still coming. Jamal unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up slowly. At 12, he was tall for his age, with kind eyes and a confidence that belied his humble South Side Chicago upbringing. His grandmother's voice echoed in his mind: "Music heals, baby. Don't ever forget that." As he walked toward the front of the cabin, his footsteps barely audible on the plush carpet, every eye turned to him. Henry didn't notice at first, too consumed with trying to prevent Clara from crying herself into exhaustion. But Margaret cleared her throat, drawing his attention to the young boy approaching. "Excuse me," Jamal said softly, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to do. His heart pounded as he looked up at the billionaire who seemed larger than life, even in his disheveled state. Henry turned, Clara still crying in his arms, and found himself face to face with the scholarship recipient he'd barely acknowledged during boarding. This decision would change everything, though neither of them knew it yet. Jamal's eyes met Henry's with surprising directness. "Maybe I can sing to her?" Henry's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted Clara's blanket for the 100th time, sweat beading on his forehead despite the plane's perfect climate control. The crying had been relentless for over an hour now, and he could feel the weight of every passenger's stare boring into his back. This wasn't how Henry Thompson, CEO of Thompson Industries, was supposed to appear in public, disheveled, desperate, and utterly defeated by a 13-pound baby. "Come on, sweetheart," he whispered, his voice cracking with exhaustion. "Daddy's here. Everything's okay." But even as he said the words, he knew they weren't true. Nothing had been okay since Sarah died 6 months ago, leaving him to navigate single parenthood while running a billion-dollar empire. From his seat 3 rows back, Jamal watched the scene unfold with growing concern. His grandmother's voice echoed in his mind from just hours earlier at O'Hare. "Baby, you got a gift for bringing peace to troubled souls. Don't you ever forget that." She'd been talking about his music, about how his voice could calm her during her worst pain from the cancer treatments. But looking at this struggling father, Jamal wondered if maybe his gift extended beyond just singing. The businessman tried every trick in the book, rattling colorful toys, making silly faces, even attempting what looked like a corporate presentation to a baby. "Look, Clara, this is your favorite giraffe," Henry said desperately, waving a plush toy that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. But Clara's wails only intensified, her tiny fists batting the toy away. Jamal closed his eyes, remembering the lullaby his mother used to sing when thunderstorms kept him awake. In their tiny apartment in Detroit, her voice had been like warm honey, wrapping around him like a protective cocoon. She died when he was 8, but her songs lived on in his heart, carrying him through foster homes and difficult nights. A flight attendant approached Henry with practiced sympathy. "Sir, is there anything we can do? Perhaps some warm milk for the baby?" "We've tried everything," Henry replied, his composure finally cracking. "She won't take the bottle, won't sleep, won't. She just wants her mother." The last words came out as barely a whisper, but Jamal heard them clearly. That's when Jamal understood. This wasn't just about a crying baby. This was about grief, about loss, about a man trying to fill a void that seemed impossible to bridge. The expensive suit and private jet couldn't mask the raw pain in Henry's eyes, a pain Jamal recognized from his own mirror. But here's what shocked everyone watching: social barriers that seemed insurmountable moments before began to dissolve. Jamal stood up slowly, his heart pounding. Every instinct told him to sit back down, to mind his own business. After all, what could a 17-year-old kid from the inner city offer a billionaire? But his grandmother's words pushed him forward, along with something deeper. The memory of every time someone had helped him when he needed it most. The other passengers watched with barely concealed curiosity. As Jamal made his way down the narrow aisle, a few whispered among themselves, clearly questioning what this young black boy thought he could accomplish. Where a wealthy father had failed. But Jamal had learned long ago that judgment from strangers was just noise. What mattered was the call to help echoing in his heart. Henry looked up as Jamal's shadow fell across his seat, his red-rimmed eyes meeting the boy's gentle gaze. For a moment, neither spoke. Clara's cries filled the space between them, but underneath the chaos, something shifted. "Excuse me, sir," Jamal said softly, his voice carrying a maturity beyond his years. "I don't mean to intrude, but maybe I can sing to her." The tension in the cabin was suffocating as Henry stared at this young boy, who had just offered to help with Clara. The businessman's pride warred with his desperation. Here was a child, probably no older than 12, suggesting he could do what Henry, with all of his resources and experience, couldn't manage. "You want to sing to her?" Henry's voice carried a mixture of skepticism and exhaustion. Around them, passengers were beginning to shift uncomfortably in their seats, some pulling out phones to record the unfolding drama. Henry could already imagine the headlines: "Tech billionaire can't control his own baby." Jamal nodded earnestly, his dark eyes filled with genuine concern. "My mama used to sing to me when I couldn't sleep. Sometimes old songs work better than new tricks." His voice held a wisdom that seemed far beyond his years. Clara's wails had reached a crescendo that made conversation nearly impossible. Henry glanced around the cabin, noting the barely concealed irritation on several passengers' faces. A woman in first class had actually put on noise-canceling headphones, while a businessman kept checking his watch with obvious annoyance. "Fine," Henry said finally, his voice barely audible over Clara's cries. "But just for a minute. Jamal stepped closer, and something magical happened. As soon as he began to sing, a low, melodious humming that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest, the entire cabin fell silent. Even Clara's cries seemed to quiet slightly, as if she too was drawn to the unexpected sound. The song was hauntingly beautiful, something that sounded like it had been passed down through generations. Jamal's voice, though young, carried a richness that filled the space between them. Henry found himself leaning in, captivated not just by the boys singing, but by the complete transformation in the atmosphere around them. For a precious few moments, Clara's sobs reduced to soft whimpers. Hope flickered in Henry's chest as he watched his daughter's face relax slightly. But you could see in Jamal's eyes that music wasn't just a hobby for him. It was his lifeline. "I've been singing since I could talk," Jamal whispered during a brief pause, never taking his eyes off Clara. "My grandmother says music heals what medicine can't touch. I'm trying to get into Berkeley College of Music someday." But he trailed off, the unspoken financial reality hanging heavy between them. Just as Henry began to believe they'd found their miracle, Clara's brief calm shattered. Her cries returned with renewed intensity, now mixed with frustrated hiccups that made her tiny body shake. The false hope crashed down around them, and Henry felt his shoulders sag in defeat. "I'm sorry," he started to say, but Jamal held up a gentle hand. "Sometimes babies just need to feel safe," the boy said quietly. Then, to everyone's absolute shock, including his own, Jamal reached out his arms toward Clara. "May I?" The request hung in the air like a challenge to everything Henry thought he knew about trust, about boundaries, about the world itself. Here was this young stranger asking to hold his most precious possession, and somehow, impossibly, Henry found himself nodding. What happened next would change everything they thought they knew about miracles. The plane groans against another violent wave of turbulence. As Jamal gently cradles Clara in his arms, the entire cabin seems to hold its breath, watching this unexpected moment unfold. Henry's eyes are fixed on his daughter, witnessing something he never thought possible. "Shh, little one," Jamal whispers, his voice carrying the same warmth that had captivated everyone moments before. Clara's tiny fists, which had been clenched in frustration for what felt like hours, slowly begin to relax. Her red, tear-stained cheeks start to lose their angry flush as she nestles deeper into Jamal's protective embrace. Henry feels his throat tighten with emotion. Here's his own daughter, the child he struggled to comfort since losing his wife, finding peace in the arms of a stranger. The irony isn't lost on him that this young boy possesses something Henry, with all his wealth and resources, cannot provide. "How are you doing that?" Henry asks quietly, leaning forward in his seat. The skepticism that had clouded his judgment earlier has completely evaporated, replaced by genuine wonder. Jamal looks up with a gentle smile. "My mama always said babies can feel your heart. If you're calm, they get calm too." He adjusts Clara slightly, supporting her head with practiced care. "I used to help with my little cousins back home. Sometimes the simplest things work the best." The cabin has transformed into something almost sacred. Passengers who had been shooting irritated glances now watch with soft expressions. Even the businessman who had earlier complained about the noise finds himself moved by the scene unfolding before them. But what happens next leaves everyone speechless. Jamal begins humming again, this time a different melody entirely. It's a lullaby his grandmother had sung to him during those long nights, when thunder scared him as a child. Clara's breathing starts to synchronize with the gentle rhythm of his voice. "Rockabye baby" in the treetop, he sings softly, his young voice carrying notes of pure tenderness. When the wind blows, the cradle will rock. Henry watches, mesmerized, as his daughter's eyelids grow heavy. For the first time since takeoff, Clara's face shows complete serenity. Her tiny fingers curl around Jamal's shirt, holding on as if she's found exactly what she was searching for. "I can't believe this," whispers Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman across the aisle. "That child has a gift." The transformation isn't just in Clara. Henry notices something shifting within himself too. Watching Jamal's patience, his natural instinct to nurture, makes Henry question everything about his own approach to fatherhood. When had he last held Clara like this? When had he last sung to her without checking his phone or thinking about the next board meeting? As the plane begins its descent toward New York, the turbulence finally subsides. Clara's breathing deepens, and incredibly, impossibly, she falls into a peaceful sleep. The cabin erupts in quiet applause, passengers nodding appreciatively at Jamal's remarkable achievement. The flight attendant, Sarah, approaches Henry with a thoughtful expression. She glances between Jamal, who's still gently rocking the sleeping baby, and Henry, who looks both grateful and overwhelmed. "Mr. Thompson," she says quietly, "perhaps we should discuss some form of compensation for this young man. What he's done is truly extraordinary." Henry's mind races. Compensation feels both too little and somehow inappropriate. How do you put a price on peace? How do you quantify the gift of seeing your child truly content for the first time in months? But as he looks at Jamal's worn sneakers, his carefully maintained but clearly second-hand clothes, Henry realizes this might be about more than just money. "You know what, Jamal," Henry says, his voice thick with emotion. "I think I might have something bigger in mind than just compensation." He pauses, studying the young man who has given him back his daughter's smile. "Something that could change everything for you." As the plane touches down at JFK Airport, Henry's mind formulates what might be the biggest surprise of this entire extraordinary flight. As the plane's wheels touch down on the tarmac at JFK International Airport, something magical happened that nobody could have anticipated. The entire cabin erupted in spontaneous applause, not for the pilot's smooth landing, but for the remarkable young man who had transformed their flight from chaos to pure wonder. Jamal looked up from where Clara slept peacefully in his arms, his eyes wide with surprise at the thunderous ovations surrounding him. Passengers who had initially watched with skeptical glances now stood on their feet, their faces beaming with admiration and respect. The elderly woman from seat 12A wiped tears from her cheeks, while the businessman who had earlier complained about the noise now clapped the loudest of all. Henry Thompson, Billionaire CEO and one of the most powerful men in America, stood frozen in this moment of revelation. For the first time in months since his wife's passing, he felt something shift deep within his chest. This young boy, who couldn't afford a first-class ticket, who wore sneakers with worn-out soles, had just given him the greatest gift imaginable, showing him how to truly connect with his own daughter. "Son," Henry said, his voice thick with emotion as the applause finally died down, "I don't know how to thank you properly." Jamal carefully transferred the sleeping Clara back to her father's arms, and Henry marveled at how naturally his daughter settled against him now, as if Jamal's gentle touch had somehow reset her trust in the world. "You don't need to thank me, sir. I just did what felt right." But Henry knew that the conventional response, pulling out his wallet, writing a check, would diminish the profound beauty of what had just occurred. This wasn't about money. This was about recognizing true talent, genuine compassion, and the kind of character that couldn't be bought or taught. "Jamal," Henry said, pulling out his business card with one hand while supporting Clara with the other, "I organize a benefit concert every year for children's charities. We've had Grammy winners, platinum artists, musicians who've sold millions of records." He paused, looking directly into Jamal's eyes. "But I've never heard anything as powerful as what you just shared with us today. Would you honor us by performing at this year's concert?" The color drained from Jamal's face. "Sir, I'm just a kid from the South Side. I've never performed anywhere bigger than my church." "That church produced something extraordinary," Henry replied, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "And I have a feeling that concert stage is going to be the smallest venue you'll ever play." He glanced around at the other passengers, many of whom were still lingering, reluctant to break the spell of this incredible moment. "What you did today wasn't just about calming a baby. You showed all of us what real strength looks like, what compassion can accomplish, what happens when we look past our differences and see each other's hearts." The flight attendant, who had witnessed everything, approached them. "In 15 years of flying, I've never seen anything like this," she said softly. "You have a gift that goes far beyond music, young man." As they prepared to disembark, Henry made another decision that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier. "Jamal, I want you to have my personal number, not just for the concert, but because I think Clara and I could learn a lot from having you in our lives. Would that be okay?" Jamal nodded, still processing the surreal turn his simple act of kindness had taken. "I'd like that, Mr. Thompson. Maybe I could teach Clara some more songs. I think she'd love that," Henry said, looking down at his peacefully sleeping daughter with new eyes. For months, he had been so focused on providing for Clara financially that he had forgotten the most important provision of all: emotional presence, patient love, and the willingness to see the world through her innocent perspective. As they walked through the gate together, an unlikely pair, the billionaire in his tailored suit and the young boy with his grandmother's wisdom, Henry realized that Jamal had given him far more than a peaceful flight. He had given him a roadmap back to his daughter's heart and shown him that sometimes the most profound teachers come in the most unexpected packages. The story of their flight would spread like wildfire across social media in the coming days, but more importantly, it would plant seeds of transformation in everyone who witnessed it. Jamal would indeed perform at that benefit concert 6 months later, launching a music career that would inspire millions. Henry would learn to be the father Clara deserved, finding joy in bedtime lullabies and afternoon sing-alongs. But perhaps most significantly, their story would serve as a powerful reminder that in our divided world, connection is still possible when we choose to see beyond surface differences and recognize the common humanity that binds us all together. Have you ever witnessed an unexpected act of kindness that changed everything? Share your story in the comments below, because sometimes the most ordinary moments contain the seeds of extraordinary transformation.